Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I have a special guest with me tonight. Marcus Cage is here. He is the host of The Political Matrix and What I've Been Thinking with Marcus Cage. Welcome back, Marcus.
Thank you so much. I'm always happy to sit down with you, Sabby.
Thanks so much. So Marcus and I have a story to tell you about that I don't think many people are covering. And I want to give a quick, shout out to Afeni because she was the one that sent me this article. But it's about an experiment that happened in Philadelphia. So I'm actually going to go ahead and get started with that story. I want to read a little bit about it here. Philadelphia apologizes for experiments on Black inmates. Okay, so this came out in October. The city of Philadelphia issued an apology Thursday for unethical medical experiments performed on mostly Black inmates at its Holmesburg prison from the 1950s through the 1970s. The move comes after community activists and families of some of those inmates raised the need for a formal apology. It also follows a string of apologies from various U.S. cities over historically racist policies or wrongdoing in the wake of the nationwide racial reckoning after the killing of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer. The city allowed University of Pennsylvania researcher Dr. Albert Klingman to conduct the dermatological, biochemical, and pharmaceutical experiments that intentionally exposed about 300 inmates to viruses, fungus, asbestos, and chemical agents, including dioxin, a component of Agent Orange. The vast majority of Klingman's experiments were performed on Black men, many of whom were awaiting trial and trying to save money for bail, and many of whom were illiterate. Now, before I go further into this, Marcus, chime in here because I know you were telling me there's a book about this as well.
Yes, the book is by Alan like Kornblum or something. It's called Acre of Skin, and it basically goes off the quote which the doctor said, and the quote was, "All I saw before me were acres of skin. It was like a farmer seeing fertile field for the first time." And so in the book, it has a little bit of discrepancies as far as the numbers, especially because like it gives like 300 for like just for dermatology and issues like that. But when it starts getting to some of the more stuff like the different acids that were used and the Ancient Orange and the dioxin, and I mean, it was stuff for like foot fungus that they were doing. And this was contracted by major corporations, businesses, and the U.S. government also over this, easily 20-year period. They called this prison the Terror Dome.
It goes on to say Klingman, who would go on to pioneer the acne and wrinkle treatment Retin A, died in 2010. Many of the former inmates would have lifelong scars and health issues from the experiments. A group of the inmates filed a lawsuit against the university and Klingman in 2000 that was ultimately thrown out because of a statute of limitations. So they tried to get some type of accountability here, but I guess you have to have you have to file within a certain timeline, depending on the event. And it goes on to say Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney said in the apology that the experiments were exploited a vulnerable population and the impact of the medical racism that has extended for generations. Now, Marcus, this is one of those things where I've told people this before. Obviously, this is not new. We know about the Tuskegee experiment. For those who are not aware, in reference to gynecology, how do you think a lot of those treatments and those practices became available? They were actually experimenting on Black women.
Yep. No anesthesia either. So let's keep that in mind. They were literally just taking knives to these women, and you know, no anesthesia, not like here, take a shot of alcohol, nothing, and just inflicting massive pain. And it started with this. Later on, Woodrow Wilson started working on, what was it, chemical warfare. Hey, what's up, Colin? Good to see you, brother. But the chemical warfare that they wanted to work on, as far as possible wars, stuff that they were going to do in World War I and possibly later on, which eventually World War II, is where some of this experimentation happened. And so, you know how you said like retinol A?
Mm-hmm.
Well, think of what that sounds like. We know a certain chemical called retinol, which a lot of women will use for like a facial treatment. It comes from these experiments. And so when we start looking at the totality of what they were doing, mustard gas. You ever wonder where they get these studies and they start talking about, well, cannabis isn't that dangerous and this is that dangerous, and where they're getting this stuff from? A lot of it comes from this experiment and experiments like this.
That's right. That's right. It goes on to say, without excuse, we formally and officially extend a sincere apology to those who were subjected to this inhumane and horrific abuse. We are also sorry it took far too long to hear these words. Last year, the University of Pennsylvania issued a formal apology and took Klingman's name off some honorifics like an annual lecture series and professorship. The university also directed research funds to fellows focused on dermatological issues in people of color. So for those just joining, Philadelphia apologizes for experiments on Black inmates. And the gentleman that you see here in the picture, Edward Anthony, speaks of his time at Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia and the test in which he participated in while he was an inmate. So he was one of the people that they experimented on. And I just think it's nice that they apologize, but my issue is like they should have done more. Like there's no type of monetary, compensation or whatever, but we've seen this go on for too long where they just kind of use Black people to experiment on, to just like as if their lives don't matter.
Yeah, and I mean, and then it's a wonder why people are like, well, a lot of Black people aren't taking the vaccinations. Well, think about it. How long ago was Tuskegee? Not that long. How long ago was this? Not that long. And so when you know that the history, that the government has a track record of doing this, and when I said U.S. government, people out there, U.S. Army is part of some of the people who were contracting them in some of these experiments, especially with the mustard gas, which the mustard gas was illegal by this time period because per the Geneva Convention in the 1920s, it had been made illegal. But yet they were using this Ancient Orange. So you guys wonder why these Vietnam vets were coming down with all these issues with Ancient Orange. This is where it came from, this study of the technology. And what they were doing is they were dropping it in mass across the whole entire fields. They didn't care if it hurt the enemies, hurt our troops, whatever. And it started with experimentation on Black people. And I want to shout out what Eric said out there. Eric said, they always come up with the statutes of limitation stuff. And they knew this was going on. The books about this stuff and documentation about this stuff, which was through multiple universities, had like the charts on that. Like they didn't have all the names, but they knew, okay, this person, we tried sulfuric acid, we tried citric acid, or we literally burned all the way down to their arm, down to the bone. We put poison ivy on this person. We put poison ivy on people's genitalia. Oak and all this stuff, and just let them suffer to see what was going to happen. And this is what these people were doing. I mean, it's mind-boggling to think how you could do this for 20 years. And that's why I say that number, the amount of people who were able to be held at a given time was about 1,200. So you do the math, 1,200 residents, 20 years, that 300 number just falls apart on its face right there. Because per this man's own statement, he saw it as acres that he could just acres of skin he could go through. And so
That's
you
right.
know that he didn't just do one or two and then like, oh, well, you know, my conscience, I'm not. No, he was doing everything he could. And Dow Chemicals, remember, a lot of people who didn't take the Pfizer vaccination, which vaccination did they take? Johnson & Johnson. Johnson & Johnson was one of these companies which was testing stuff here on them.
My whole thing is there no one that investigates the prisons? Like, is there no one that comes in to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do and they're not? That's a big part of the problem.
Yeah. I mean, granted, I didn't work in prison. I worked in pretrial, but so I'm a little bit familiar with the corrections system, working in the field for about three and a half years. And it's very little monitoring from the outside what goes on in there. The only monitoring is that, okay, are you making sure to do your wellness checks, to peek in the window so the inmates aren't necessarily harming each other? On the pretrial level, it's a little bit more enforcement of that. But once you get to the prison level and you start dealing with, like we were dealing with numbers, say one officer to about 40 residents. That's what the nice name we like to call it. Residents, not inmates. They're residents. Mm-hmm. It's like this is a hotel, you know, it's nice and comfy. And so we would have about 40 residents. When you get up to post-trial and actual prison, which some of them, depending on their sentencing, if it's not that long, they might do it in a pretrial facility. But most of the time when they actually get to prison or penitentiary, you're dealing with maybe about like 10 officers for 300 inmates at a given time on a given shift. And so many holes in the room. That's the reason why you hear these accounts of rape, people getting stabbed. I mean, how can somebody sit there and have time to build shanks and stuff? Because there's a lot of supervision that's not being taken. And there's blind spots throughout all these prisons. Plus, when you have government contracts who are doing this, and keep in mind, a lot of these prisons are private prisons too.
That's right. So there's profit to be made. That's another thing where the prison system, like there's profit there. That's why we need to get rid of like for profit prisons. It's disturbing. I want to show people here also, because you can actually watch the documentary. Let me go ahead and share this here. I can't play it because it does have copyright, but Acres of Skin, the documentary, it's on YouTube. So you can actually watch this to see more about the history behind it. But it's just, it makes you wonder what other things have happened like all this time that we just may not know about. And why is this coming out now?
Well, I think why it's coming out right now is because they know it's right past the statute of limitations on some of this stuff. That's the reason why when you hear these dumps like the JFK, you know, files, and they'll be like, "Oh, we're releasing some of the redacted files." Well, because they know that this person is probably died and this person is past this, and they know that, okay, you can't attack these people. It's a way of protecting the powerful. That's what's going on here, because they're because they know not only would that doctor, that's the reason why, okay, he's been dead. Well, now it's been enough time where maybe even his wife, who they probably could have came after, maybe she's passed on also. And so they wait till after there's no way where, okay, you can't come after him criminally. So now you can't even come after him civilly. And so they're like, well, we told you, Sabby. We told you. Yeah, you told us, but you told us, you literally waited to a point when there's nothing we could do about it.
There needs to be some type of movement around this. I mean, I really do wish more people were talking about this, because it's been an ongoing issue, especially for Black people, not just in the prison system, but just like using Black people for experiments. And it just, this is why, like, when people were really upset with those that didn't want to take the jab or whatever, right? Yeah. And they were like, no, you can't make me, you can't impose mandates on people. To me, it was just kind of like, have you sat back and thought about the fact why people may have that opinion, like especially Black people, considering what has been done, what they've been signed up for to do like these experimental like treatments or whatever. And it just seemed like to me, like some people just could not understand that history has shown us that this is not a good idea. And I felt like people were just like, well, those people who choose not to do that, that's stupid. Why would you not do it? And not to be mean, but it was predominantly white people yelling at Black people, telling them like, well, you're stupid if you don't do that. And I'm like, do you not know like what has happened to us in our history?
I mean, we literally sit with a national anthem, which is actually racist. They just decide to not sing that third stanza, which hopefully, I'm pretty sure your audience is aware of what the third stanza talks about. If you don't know, go look it up. But there's been, and it's not like some people are like, well, slavery was a long time ago. Jim Crow was a long time ago. You got to look at it. It's went from slavery to Jim Crow, from Jim Crow to all of these different redlining laws. It went from that to, you know, shutting down plants and stuff in the areas. Like, it's a part where I grew up in Kansas City called Fairfax, where NAFTA, a lot of those jobs got shipped out of there. What did that do? Leave a lot of poverty. Next thing you know, there's a lot of drugs and stuff in the neighborhood. Next thing you know, you have gangster rap all of a sudden, and then you have private prisons springing up everywhere. And I'm like, you're literally showing us a roadmap to go down a negative pathway, which is being produced. Now, we could say capitalism, which is true. Capitalism does have a part to play in this, but it's what people are doing with it. Does it have to be done this way? I mean, even if we disagree with the system, do they have to target it, micro-target it to a certain demographic of people and continuously do these things like that? No, they don't, but they're doing it. Now, I'm not saying that there weren't any other like demographics which were affected. I'm pretty sure that there were poor whites in there, plenty of you know, Hispanics and Native Americans. But what I'm saying is primarily this doctor, Dr. Albert Kligman, and I say, go ahead, Google him, look him up. We need to, perfect example. Me and Sabby actually talked about this one right before. It says Puerto Rican sterilization was a U.S. project for population control. Pacific Islanders were repeatedly near nuclear test sites. The Tuskegee Airmen. Yes, I bring this one up normally all the time. I was just telling Sabby about this, that this was happening at the same time. All of this stuff was happening from the 50s into the 70s.
Yep. There's something else I want to show people. I'm just going to share this really quick. The Atlanta Black Star, they talked about this a while back. Now, this was in 2014 where they reported this. 5 unethical medical experiments that used Black people as guinea pigs. So the first one that they mentioned is the Tuskegee syphilis study, which I think that's the one that, would you say, like, Marcus, that's the one that most people probably know about?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. The second one, now this one I did not know about, CDC study on experimental MMR. And it says here that like parents of the Black babies who were receiving these were not made aware of the risk of their child developing autism.
Thus, the so-called anti-vaxxer movement, and why a lot of people don't want their kids vaccinated. And we saw this huge influx of autism, which they say it has nothing to do with any kind of vaccinations, shots, or anything.
Yep. And then the third one, because they mentioned 5. This is the one I was referring to. Surgical experiments on enslaved people. And it says here, this is J. Marion Sims. Sims performed surgeries on the women without using any anesthesia because he believed the operations weren't painful enough to justify the trouble. And this is linked to the complaints we have today, where doctors, this belief that doctors have that Black people don't feel pain.
I mean, especially, and it's worse with Black women. It's a lot worse with Black women, and I just wanted to make sure to highlight that, because especially when they go in for labor issues and stuff like that, having children's, or what is it called, mastectomies, or any of these different things which are generated directly for women, because in the Black community, women tend to have a little bit more trust in going to the doctor.
Yep.
And this is the treatment that they get. That's the reason why you have in the Black community specifically that Black males typically find out about some kind of colon cancer or something, and then boom, they're dead a year later. And a lot of the women, they know what they're dealing with, but they'll still go because they know it's life or death. And these are some of the problems which you have with this whole system.
That's right. That's right. The fourth one that they mentioned. Oh, they lost that one somehow. Oh, I know what this one is. Henrietta. Did you know the story about Henrietta? Henrietta Lacks?
Now, that one I don't know. That one I don't.
So this was the woman. There's a picture of her there. I don't know why they put the picture and not the actual story. So that's weird. But this was the woman. Oh, here it is.
Oh,
the cloning of Henrietta Lacks cells. Now, this is a big one because there's a book written about it. Her family, I think they did receive monetary compensation a couple of years ago. But for people who are not aware, let me make this a little bit larger. Henrietta Lacks was the source of the first line of immortal human cells to ever be cloned in the 1950s. But the removal of her cells were done without her permission or knowledge. Doctors noticed that Lacks cells were able to stay alive for longer periods of time than previous cells. So in order to conduct research, they removed 2 samples of her cervix during surgery, one part that was healthy and one part that was cancerous. Researchers have grown roughly 20 tons of her cells since her death. In addition to harvesting Lacks cells without her knowledge or permission, researchers also published the family's medical records without their consent. So this was the one where there's a book. It's called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. If you haven't read that book, you guys, you really need to read it. The family was on the news like when this came out a couple years ago because they had to pay them. Well, I mean, this was done without her permission.
This is, I mean, wow. I heard something about this, but I didn't know the detail and level of what was going on. But this also eerily reminds me of, I don't know if you remember that video that came out maybe a couple months back, Peter Nygaard, and it was going around like World Star Hip Hop. Basically, he was sitting at a table with a bunch of young Black women, and he was trying to buy any kind of like cell DNA that he could from them. I mean, he was saying that, you know, we'll take, I don't want to gross anybody out here, but he's saying that he will take female waste products.
Mm-hmm.
And he's talking about how much for you to sell me your eggs and all kind of different stuff. And he's literally like sitting there throwing out numbers to these women like it's a casual, no big deal conversation. I mean,
that's right.
It's disturbing as hell listening to it.
That's right. And the jam in here is spot on. She's the reason we can study cancer now. She saved millions of lives, but barely any pay or recognition. That's a huge story, you guys. Like, definitely read that book if you haven't had a chance to. I think you can get it at the library too. And then there's another one here. And this is Sarah Bartman.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. Sarah Bartman was only 20 years old when her life changed forever. She was one of 2 Khoikhoi, I hope I said that correctly, women who were put on display across Europe as part of a freak show attraction. The women were referred to as Hottentot Venus. Hottentot used to be the name used to refer to the Khoi people, but it is now considered to be a racist term, and Venus was in reference to the Roman goddess of love. In the early 1800s, Bartman was the subject of scientific and medical research in France. Despite constant legal battles to try to get the woman released back to her home, she remained in European custody for what they considered to be scientific research. After she died, researchers kept her sexual organs and her brain and put them on display.
Mm-hmm. And this goes into the human zoos, which they were having in Europe. And when it's talking about the koi, for those who are not familiar, she would be like one of the tribes of people out of like South Africa. Nelson Mandela. Mm-hmm. His people would trace back to like the Khoisan people. She would have been of those people. And so you had a couple of different groups within the Khoisan, and she would have been one of those tribes. And so, this is just one of the things they did in these human zoos, which you definitely should look at. They literally went throughout all kinds of different parts of Africa and took random people and decided to treat them like they did this poor Sarah here.
Absolutely horrible. And I think there's one more, if I didn't get to, those are all of them. Yeah. So that was five unethical medical experiments used Black people as guinea pigs. And it's really unfortunate. Like I said before, a lot of people don't know about this stuff. I know even when I was in school, like my history classes, they didn't teach us. They taught us about the Tuskegee experiment, but not the other ones that I just mentioned.
Yeah. Well, the reason why they didn't go into the other ones and they taught us about Tuskegee is they had to tell us about at least one of these, and then let us get our outrage out on this one. And that one of the other ones, it's not as gruesome because what they did is they just denied treatment, and so they allowed people to die horribly. That's still bad enough, but they wanted to hide the ones where it was much more brutal. I mean, like a lot of modern dentistry got it starts from slavery also, and what they were doing, yanking teeth out and things like that. And then another one, which is often forgot about, not talked about. I don't know about you all out there, but I know for me, definitely, one of the things which I definitely learned in school, learned about, and every year we learned about it a lot in detail, the Holocaust.
Yeah.
At the very same time, King Leopold III, who was in the Congo, killing, I think the number was like 20 million in the Congo. And he was chopping off arms. He was castrating. I mean, it was extremely brutal. And that's not even heard of. Oh, you're so welcome.
Terrible, terrible, terrible. So these are the things, like, you guys need to hear about these stories. And I feel like there's not enough, people talking about it. Like I said, they're not teaching kids about this in school.
No. That's the reason why I have so much of an issue when people start talking about, critical race theory. It's not about critical race theory. It's about trying to teach you the history that's not being taught. Mm-hmm. I mean, how many of us in school learned about Christopher Columbus, right? How many of you guys know that in his book that he wrote that he used to like to rape young girls between the age of 6 to 9?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people probably don't know that part, though.
Oh.
A lot of people don't know about certain conquistadors, which said that literally the day I got there to the day I left, my sword did not stop swinging. I mean, how many people out there know about gator bait? They literally used to take Black slave women's children, put them on a rope, and throw them out there to try to catch gators, so that they can make shoes and belts and stuff like that. Or about the sugar canes. We always hear about cotton.
Mm-hmm.
But the sugar canes had a much higher death rate because the temperature was so brutal. And so you literally just had them dropping dead. All right, drag this body out of the way, push another one up. And so they were going through slaves so fast in the Caribbean. Nobody talks about that. And then we also forget 60% of the slave trade out of West Africa went to South America. A
Mm-hmm.
large chunk went to Brazil. Like 50% of the slaves went to Brazil out of West Africa.
That's why you have Afro Brazilians.
Mm-hmm.
And you're
And
right. A lot of people don't talk about that.
all the way into Colombia and Nicaragua and all of these different areas, all the way through, literally through the whole Caribbean. The only thing that separated was which slave master you went to. First, South America was mostly the Spaniards. Then it switched. Brazil switched to the Portuguese after the Spaniards were kicked out. A good chunk of the middle of the country was French slavery until the Louisiana Purchase, when then they were sold into the rest of America. And then slavery changed dramatically for those people. It's kind of weird. It's like the French were super brutal on the island of Haiti and what's Haiti and Dominican Republic. But they were somehow nicer in Louisiana. That was only for a period until they sold. Once they sold and it was into Americans' hands, those slaves who were going to college, yes, there were slaves that were going to college. There were slaves who owned businesses where they could sell to other slaves. But once that ended, they got the same treatment as anybody who was over in Mississippi and Texas, all that.
That's right. And Silver brought up something here I think is important. That's why reparations is so important. We need to honor 40 acres, 1 mule, and the 500 broken treaties. And I do want to add, reparations isn't just about slavery. That also includes Jim Crow.
Yeah. And sundown town, black codes. I mean, we can keep going on and on and on. Remember last year when I had you on my show and we were talking about like Black history, and we went into I did a little short video, like either I did it before or after, or maybe I showed some of it, where I was going through the massacres, and I just named them and threw out some numbers really quickly. There are so many. I mean, we talk about Greenville, Oklahoma, Tulsa. We talk about Black Wall Street, but we don't talk about the same thing happened in Chicago. We don't talk about the same thing happened in Massachusetts. We don't talk about the same thing happened in Louisiana. We don't talk about the same thing happening in New York, in Florida. It happened all over the country. There were so many of these massacres, and we hear nothing about them.
Yeah, there were multiple Black Wall Streets. I mean, Tulsa is the one that most people know about. That's the one that's talked about the most. But there were multiple ones. Every time, basically in this country, every time that Black people tried to acquire wealth and build their own communities, it was burned down.
Yep. Well, and that's the crazy part to me. It was like, okay, well, and I wanted to add on, when somebody who made the comment about 40 acres and a mule, it was actually 40 acres, a mule, and a rifle. They took that rifle part back, though. They were like, well, maybe there's the 40 acres and a mule, because you would have needed a rifle a lot of times to hunt. And so that's how a lot of people still were surviving, going out, I go hunt, I get me a deer, whatever, deer, a wild boar, whatever they were hunting. And, even buffalo. And so that's not focused on. And so what they said was, well, damn, we can't give them that. We can't give them this. We don't want them to rise up. That's where you had laws like loitering. That's where loitering comes from.
Yeah.
You had no job and you were freed off the plantation. But what could you do? Nothing. And so then what pops up? Sharecropping. Which my grandparents on my mom's side literally had to quit school to go and sharecrop. And then we're not talking about great-great-grand. I'm talking about my grandmother, who's still currently alive. They had to go and sharecrop, had to quit school. She had to quit school in 9th grade to go work on another. So basically, they own the land. Oh, so glad. So I'm just glad to be able to share this information, because I feel information is power. And this is how we free ourselves. Even if you can't free yourself completely physically or through the bills and stuff that we're dealing with, you can free yourself mentally and know what game is being run on you.
That's right. That's right. And these are things I think, people really need to know and understand. And I think that there was recently, I don't know if people are aware of this, there was recently a reparations rally in DC where there's thousands of people there. And I think more and more people need to be educated on it. I think we're going to try to do a reparations panel with Colin. I know Colin wants to do that at some point, to just educate people.
Let me know too. I'd like to be involved.
Yeah, I did mention you too. I said, Marcus would probably like to be a part of that.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I think, it's the comments that you get from people when they say, well, why should that money just only go to Black people? That's when I know they don't really know the history.
You don't. What this is what we have to explain. This nation was built by slavery. Exactly, Eric. A debt owed. It wasn't something given. This country was built off the back of slavery. Literally turned this nation into the hegemony of the world. Literally, slavery delivered trillions of dollars to this nation. Trillions. You wonder where your Charles Schwab's comes from, and your Lehman Brothers, and your Chase Banks, and your Wells Fargo's, and your Bank of America. Where do they come from? They come from slave money.
Yep.
Where insurance comes from? Insurance came from, we're going to, for you to get the slave across to this plantation, or to ship them from, say, the Caribbean into Virginia, just in case your slave dies, how about you pay for insurance for him? This is where these things come from.
Yep. And even in reference to 40 acres, a mule, and a rifle, they don't really want Black people to have arms now.
Nope. Why do you think
changed?
why do you think New York and California have such strong gun control? Because
I remember Ronald Reagan was a part of that with the Black Panthers, because the Black Panthers rose up in California.
Yep.
And Ronald Reagan was like, wait a minute now.
We cannot have these Negroes with all these guns.
That's right. That's right.
Well, they were worried about, at that time, you had the Nation of Islam starting to get larger also. And you had the Black Panthers, you had the Gray Panthers also. A lot of people don't know there's a Gray Panthers and White Panthers. And so they all kind of work together. But, all of this was going on, and they were seeing, during the 60s especially, they were starting to see a strong pushback from the masses. They were seeing pushbacks from the Black community. They were seeing pushbacks from the Hispanic community, because a lot of people don't know there was a such thing as called Mexico Repatriation Act. And so if you even kind of somewhat looked Mexican to them, no matter if you were a native, no matter if you were whatever, they were just throwing you in Mexico. You could have just been black and white mixed, or you could have just been a light-skinned Black person. They were just throwing you in Mexico. And a lot of this stuff happened, and it was no recompense or no fixing any of these things. Even, and here's something which a lot of people don't know when they'll talk about, well, the natives got reparations. A couple of tribes, a couple of the major tribes, the 5 top tribes, they did get reparations to a degree. You'll see certain native casinos and stuff. But what about the couple thousand or so which virtually got nothing? A lot of people don't know Native Americans literally, per capita, lead in every negative category.
Yep.
They lead in alcoholism. They lead in poverty rates. They lead in infant mortality rates. They lead in incarceration rates. And it's just because the population is so small, it's not even factored in. And then a lot of people just see that complexion and they say, well, Hispanic, Native American, yeah, whatever. They don't see a difference. But when you start, if you just take Black and brown people, which I'm including natives as brown, Black and brown people, and you take them off the demographics, the prison population drops down to virtually nothing. I mean, literally, like 80 to 90% of most of the prisons, that's what it's filled with.
Yep. Yep. And not to mention, they tried to take Native Americans' culture and heritage away from them too, through the boarding schools.
Yep. What was it? Kill the Indian, save the man.
Yep.
A lot of people don't know also, they took natives, sent them to Spain, sent them to Italy, gave them Catholicism, then brought them back to force it on the people in their why do you think these areas in Latin America are so heavily Catholic?
Yep.
Because the process from the Spaniards was brutal and fortunate. Now, granted, it was still pretty brutal throughout African American slavery too, where it was Protestantism, Lutheranism, Baptists. But you look at the Manifest Destiny, whether it was done through Catholicism, Spain, England, any of these European nations, the result was the same. It's just a minor difference in, okay, you're a Catholic, you're a Baptist. You speak Spanish, you speak French, you speak English. But this is what Manifest Destiny and all of this stuff happened. That's the reason why a debt is massively owed. And so, it's a lot once you really start digging into like how severe and massive and widespread. And don't get me wrong, a lot of people just think England, Spain, France, all of Europe had a play in this.
Yes. Thank you for saying that.
If for instance, it was like, okay, well, Great Britain, they might have been the ones who are housing the locations where the slaves are. Then you had over here, you had the Dutch who were sailing the ships. Then you had the Finns who were making the ropes for the ships. Then you had, every single person throughout Europe, it all worked as a coordinated effort from Europe against the Americas and West Africa.
Mm-hmm. And this is why, a lot of us, except for those who actually immigrated from Africa, this is why those of us that are African American, we have like our real like culture. Mm-hmm. We don't have.
Nope.
We don't have it. This is why we don't speak any African languages. That was taken away. Slaves didn't know their birth dates. So that's another thing. That's why it's hard for us to track our ancestry, because they didn't keep record of that. Mm-hmm. And just like everything that they had when they came here, they stripped them of that.
That's the reason why the name changing was so important for them.
Yep.
If you strip away a person's name, even if you take the language from them, even if you take a lot of culture from them, if they know what their name is, they can be like, wait a minute. So that name is actually a Swahili name. So I can track back to this village here and start finding out my history. Or maybe it's with the whole Kyrie stuff that's going on, maybe it's a Hebrew name. But you don't get to know that because that history is stripped away for a reason. And I know a lot, and I want to reiterate this over and over and over, especially to Hispanic and Latinos, because a lot of them don't get when you're saying your name is Hernandez or Rivera or any of these names. These are European names still that were placed upon you. More than likely, you might have spoke Aztec, you might have spoke Nahuatl, you might have spoke Back Creek, you might have spoke a whole bunch of other different dialects and had a very, very massively different name. Dominguez, all this, these are not your names. Jones, Cage, these are not our original names.
Yep. Very well said. Very well said. And I think there was some sort of a movement to try to get back to that, like during the 90s. Remember that? The whole thing, like, let's discover our roots and things like that. And like, and people naming their kids those names, like African names, because they're like, no, we need to get closer, like back to that. And I think it's really interesting. I've seen people make comments before, like, why do Black people have weird names? Define weird.
Yeah.
Like what? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's weird to you. Because it's the colonizer. That's is not your name. Because that's the thing. This is why people like Josana would always say you need to decolonize your mind.
Definitely.
And ask people to explain to you what is considered. What do you mean by weird? A weird name.
Well, it's weird because to them it's weird because Well, you just came up with his name. So if an Indian guy comes over here and his name is Ranjit, you're not going to tell him his name is weird.
That's right.
Because you're going to understand that this is part of his culture. And so are you going to really insult people who've had everything stripped away from them if they try to come up with something that they feel is unique that they've created on their own? But we live in a society that there's so much of a bias, and the framework on how we need to perceive things is given to us by somebody else.
Yep.
I mean, the more we start digging and researching, the more we'll start finding out that a lot of things are, like, for instance, I can't believe I heard that this is still being taught in schools, the Bering Strait theory.
Yep.
Do you know how many Native American tribes have been pushing back against that? And here's the thing. It's a theory. It's a theory, and it's being taught as if it's a fact. They will admit to you it's a theory. It's a lot of things that we got to think about that we're being taught in schools that are theories. They're not established facts. But yet we're running with them as if they're fact.
Right. And it even goes to, I can speak, you know, as a Black female, even when it comes to things today with like our cultural identity, like our hair, you know, I'm seeing kids on the news being suspended from school because they have braids. I'm seeing women being fired because they have natural hair.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, that's not appropriate. Again, define appropriate.
You're not going to sit there and you're not going to tell somebody who comes to work who's chic about the head wrap that they have on. You're not going to sit there and talk trash about somebody who's a Muslim who decides that they're going to wear a head covering. For the most part, if we have some kind of decent respect for each other. But when we decide, okay, well, part of what I want to do with my identity is maybe I want to grow dreads. Maybe I want to grow a beard, because they don't realize dreads a lot of times is part of the struggle. It's symbolizing something personal and internal to you. And so when we start going against somebody trying to embrace themselves, you're already going to a dark place. And here's something which is once I start doing some research and studying, Black hair just symbolizes that you have melanin in your hair. A lot of people don't realize melanin is not just in your skin. Melanin's in your hair also. When you have a lighter color hair, that's actually lower amount of melanin. So what that does is that gives you less ability. I'm talking about natural. I'm not talking about people who dye their hair different colors. But naturally what it's doing is it's giving you higher protection to deal with the climate. So the coils that, you know, the curly hair, that's to help us deal with the climate, the heat. That's the reason why people who live in those climates who are indigenous to those areas, that's the reason why they have those looks. And that's another reason how you can tell who is moved around, because a lot of times we go off of the mindset that just because a person is in a place, that's where they originate. Perfect example, Egypt. A lot of people don't realize that the Umayyad Caliphate took over all of North Africa and the Middle East, pushing most of the original residents out of that area. In fact, if you think I'm lying, ask an Egyptian if they are Hamitic or, according to the Bible, African. Ask them that question. And you know what they're going to tell you for the most part? That they descend from Ishmael, which means that their land is a little bit further over, not right there. But if a group of people took all of this land, like I remember a study came out a couple of years ago, Egypt was in the top 5 in skin cancer rates in the world. I won't say I think Denmark was like #1, but there's another one that's on there. I'm not going to say it.
Oh my God. Yeah. When people tell you these things, you guys, like, you have to ask, like, who came up with the definition? Like, who decided what's professional, what's appropriate, what's weird, or what's, unusual? It wasn't us.
Nope. Another one I would tell people to look at is when you say you're an X, go back to the etymology of these words and figure out what they mean. I mean, I can give you a couple of easy ones. Puerto Rico. What does Puerto Rico mean, Sabby? Do you know?
I do not.
It means port of riches. Costa Rica, coast of riches. This is what the colonizers named these places because this is what it was to them. This is a port of riches. That's a coast of riches. You know, I'll give you another one. Niger. For one, I don't want to get you in trouble on your show. So Niger is actually Greek. In Greek, there's no soft G. So just imagine another G and you get the proper pronunciation. It's not Niger. It's not the Niger River. That word goes to black. So that's called the Black River. Nigeria means the land of black. Ethiopia means burnt face. You think the people who live there named their place Burnt Face? I'm telling you, man, you start looking at what these words really mean and you realize the game that's been played with us.
That's right. Well said. Marcus, thank you so much for coming on and hanging out tonight. Every time you come on, so much education. So much education.
I try my best, and I always hear it's like, oh well, Sabby want me to come on. That's a bet. You already know. Anytime I can do it, I'm definitely gonna try to always come on. It's always so much fun, and your chat is awesome. So much love and shout out to everybody out there, and thank you guys for hearing me out and they're like, oh, this dude, just shut up, Marcus. You talk too much. I know I talk a lot. I'm sorry. My apologies.
Before you go, where can people find you?
Well, you guys can find me at The Political Matrix here on YouTube. And you can find me at The Political Matrix over on Rockfin. As Sabby said before, what I've been thinking, or actually, that's right, I changed it. It's Been Thinking with Young Morpheus. Now, I figure since I'm Young Morpheus, it'll be easier for all these pages to stay together. And then for like my biblical stuff, when I'm breaking down the Bible and some archaeology and history and stuff, Hebrew Apologetics with Young Morpheus and Jose. So, check that out. Any questions you guys have, even if people disagree with me, I have no problem with that. We can all talk it out, have some fun, as long as it's not disrespectful, But, yeah, I'm trying my best to have as many discussions with many people. I'm actually working on a discussion with the Orthodox Jewish. I'm not sure if it's a man or a woman. It's something on Twitter. So I'm working on that. And then I will be live tomorrow night. Of course, me and Chris for The Political Matrix. So you guys are all looking to come through. I need to have you back on sometime soon.
Let me know. Because my schedule is crazy.
Or even if I can just get you for like 30, 45 minutes or so,
Bet. Let's do it. Mm-hmm. All right, Marcus. Thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate you so much. Thank you. And oh yeah, I want to give you props. I've watched your show really grow. I remember when I was last on here, I think you were at like hitting right about 10,000. And to look where you are now and what RBN has been doing as a whole, I mean, hey, good luck, you guys. I mean, I'm glad to see, sorry for anybody take this the wrong way, but, people looking like me making a mark in independent media, it's not a lot of us. And often we're not often heard. And so it feels good to see that people are listeing to us. And I don't say just take anything I say for granted, like write it down, double check me, hey, Marcus, you screwed up here. Let me know. It's about teaching each other and all learning.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much, Marcus.
All right. You're so welcome.
Bye.
And you have a good evening.
You too.
Bye.
All right, guys. Like I said, Marcus, definitely follow him on YouTube. You will get a wealth of information over there. I'm just keeping it real. Like Marcus knows a lot about history, so definitely check him out. All right, let's shout out some of the comments here. Angela, societies have no hope in hell of moving forward without paying debts owed. Reparations are debts owed. The longer they are kicked down the road, the longer it will be before anything moves forward. I hear you 100%. Simburska, I hope I said that correctly. White supremacists pit victims against one another. There are many debts, but the Black experience is an extreme emergency of slavery under a new name. I'm going to go ahead and take these comments on Rockfin as well. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Sabby, 1, thank you for doing this and bringing it home, because who else will tell our story but us? We can't expect anyone to tell this. 2, CRT is not taught in K through 12, but in college, but it is Black history that catches the heat. 3, I was just talking about this last night when David and I spoke about Black women being left to bleed out on hospital tables. And 4, Marcus, let's not forget, it wasn't just Black people dropped off in South America. But after the Civil War, a lot of the former Confederate soldiers fled to South American countries and took their beliefs with them. Where there are whole villages in South America where they celebrate the Confederate flags. This is why you see a heavy racist tint towards Black people when they come to America and how they treat us. That is very interesting there. Very interesting. And thanks for this tip as well. 5, I remember in the 80s when it was all over the news, when it was found out after Al Sharpton did a deep dig of his lineage and found out that Thurmans owned the Sharptons during slavery. Yes, Strom Thurmond is the one of who I speak. Yes. If you've been with me for a while, you guys know I went to college in South Carolina, and the things that you need to know about Strom Thurmond, because he was absolutely appalling. Absolutely appalling. And a lot of people didn't know this until she came out publicly with it. But Strom Thurmond had a Black daughter. She came out publicly about it on the local news in South Carolina. I remember that. I'll never forget. And people were just like, what? John Doe, Sabby Sabs, did you know that Tennessee and Alabama, which are red states, recently abolished prison labor in their states, but California still has prison labor? I did not know that. I knew California still had it, but I didn't know they abolished it, but that's good to know. Thank you for the super sticker, JM. Goth Cactus. Pretty much all heroes of our history books are genocidal maniacs. You could say that again.